I also realized too, and this is episode 3 of season 3, Man Who Thinks podcast. May the 15th, 2025. Topic here is immigrants. I also just realized that this is a video version of an autobiography, now that I think about it. Because really the stories should be mine, and this is a audio video format. For those of you who are interested in how my mind thinks and what I think about and what I have to say about the things that I think about, I have 2 other seasons of this. And I've done my absolute best to take creative inspiration and put at the very most, it's 5,000 characters you can put in a description box. I've done my absolute best to put my mind into the description that somewhat relates to the video that it's attached to. You clicked on this video because the topic here is immigrants. And I'm kind of rehashing a little bit based off of what I said in episode 2, which was that in a certain way, I make these videos and this podcast exist because if there's someone who's younger that is meant to hear this, then the only way that they're ever going to hear it is if it's posted. And so the stories are about me and how I've lived my life. The stories are about my perspective of the truth. I said this yesterday. I said, sometimes people think I talk about them. I'm talking about the truth. And for me to come to realize that those are 2 different things, 6 years in the making. I didn't know about it for 4 years. So it's a 10-year process. Immigrants is the topic. Immigrants are what work on a farm like this. Very fascinating world we live in where, and I'll say it again, May 15th, 2025. That's all I'll say about it. I came to work on this farm purely out of someone saying, hey, I'm shorthanded. What do you think? I said, sure. Being an immigrant is such a fascinating thing because I look at basic, super simple stuff like sports, and I look at countries with a high emotional intelligence and countries that have a lower emotional intelligence. And I'm going to preface this by saying, I'm only speaking how I look at the world. This isn't meant for you to take it offensively. I don't want this to come across as offensively. I am saying this based off of me having looked at the world for 6 years, realizing why is it this way and can it be any different? And different in a positive, beneficial, more human way, as opposed to it being like humans taking a back seat to themselves and their overall reason for them to be here, existing. Countries that have, from what I've seen, a lower immigration diversity have a higher emotional intelligence. And the reason I'm saying it this way is because when I look at how people play sports, of course, everyone gets frustrated and everyone gets angry. But typically speaking, the people who perform better at their sport have a higher degree of emotional intelligence and are less likely to act out like a 9-year-old. And the teams that have players that act out like 9-year-olds have a lower degree of emotional intelligence that is reflected in super simple things like when the country was founded, who they were invaded by, and that's it. I look at immigrating also in the sense that the people who are coming into that country have zero reference point to why that country exists in the first place. They have a proclaimed idea that potentially isn't theirs. And when that idea is seated in the mind, it's grown and that flower blooms. But when that flower in itself has bloomed and it sticks out from the rest of the crowd, they're not going to know any different. They're just going to sit there and know what they know. Immigrants are also interesting because since they know what they know, they don't know what that country stands for, what it is meant to be. A very simple example of this is the Japanese and Germans. These people are at the top of the rope when it comes to, simple things like manufacturing and culture. Civilized. First worlders. Certainly. Clean. Respectful. Honest people. Very honest people. You know why? Because it's reflected in their work and what they create. I'd say that people immigrate to that side of the world or that side of Asia because they resonate with quality. They resonate with things being done in a particular way. I'm in America right now. People immigrate here because they have this thing called the American dream. You know why they call it a dream? You got to be asleep for it to be real. And I totally get it. I, at this point, now get it. People who immigrate nowadays are sold on any version of any dream. If I were to immigrate anywhere, it's because the reason that a place exists and what they offer is why I go to that place. Very simple, super easy. If I wanted to be the best baguette bread maker in the world, where would I go? I'd go to France. Simple as that. A lot of people immigrate because they want their lives to be easier. But the habits they have when they immigrate to whatever country they go to, do you think their habits change? It's such a fascinating thing for people to think that they could just move locations and think that their habits are just going to morph. When in reality, their habits are given. It's like a complete paradigm shift when you go out into places where there's immigrants and they're like, oh yeah, you know what, the reality of me being here is not the reality that I thought it was going to be 15 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And then they go on and they all explain the same thing about how the world changes in such a way that they have, really what it is the inability to adapt. Because they're not from the country that they're originally born in, and they're not from the country that they're in now. So they have zero personal relevance of themselves. So they look at the world and what's considered popular, and they crowdsource their self-esteem. That's a quote. And there's nothing wrong with immigrating. It's just that why would you immigrate to a place if that place doesn't represent the values that you have now? And if you're willing to give up the values you have in the country you live in, and you think you're going to pick up somebody else's values in the country you're going to, then when are you going to pick up your own values? When are you going to decide that one thing may be for you or not for you? When are you going to decide that that track that they have you going on actually isn't going to do you any good. It's a common theme with immigrants, actually, at least the ones that I've spoken to. They'll say super simple things like, yeah, the reality is that my farm in that country that I came from, where no one bothered me and I could basically just do whatever I wanted. Yeah, they actually let me do that over there in that country, and then over here you gotta pay for all the things that were free over there. It's a fascinating world, isn't it? So being the child of two immigrants and having had witnessed what that life has been like, eye-opening, certainly. Especially when you take who I am as a person, then you turn around and say, okay, these other people, they're children of immigrants. How is their life any different? And then you realize that there's a common theme that happens within immigrants specifically. And then you realize, like, oh, I did all that by choice. Choice in the extent that it's taking on somebody else's fears or doubts or insecurities or perspectives of the world. And then realizing that the only reason that you did was because you never decided to take hold of your own. And then, interestingly enough, those that you did mirror were based off of faulty beliefs, insecurities that your parents never once considered, thought of taking care of, so that they didn't hand them to you. And then a person like me comes into the picture where I have to realize that I'm being, what would be like the term for all this? I'm being impressed with concepts that really don't do anyone any good. And then when I realize why that happens, and then realize that I have to get rid of them, and then realize how much better off I am without them, and then realize how much better the future for, whether it be my last name, my family, society, how much better they'll be, because instead of me repeating the same things that were passed on for potentially 3 generations, 4 generations, 5 generations, I could sit here being like, you know what? By me putting a stop to this, I wonder what happens. I wonder what happens when I decide to do things so differently that the naysayers and the doubt and the crisis management team sits there on the phone, red alert, this guy's going AWOL, he not in line with what I taught him, this isn't the person who I raised. But yet when I find my own version of inner peace, a new direction that is fulfilling in my life, that had nothing to do with my family. That's another thing with immigrants, is that a lot of immigrants want the association, especially when it comes to parenting, that the parent can somehow vicariously live through the child. That the success that the child has is based off of the fact that they're an immigrant, or the fact that they went above and beyond because they wanted to go get these people out of the ground or wherever it is. Or that the child, the only reason they had success was because they grew up realizing what success wasn't, which might honestly be the only real thing to take away from from being quote unquote indoctrinated. If I had to give any advice to anyone who's the child of an immigrant, who has the opportunity, like how I mentioned, to look at what's being given to them, or what's being told to them, or how they were raised, and realizing like, man, you know what, to a certain extent, I would never want that for my children. No way. Or, you know what? Realizing, and this is what I realized too, man, my whole family had it that way. That's why they're giving it to me. They really just don't know any better. And then really being the person to put their foot down and say, okay, you know, I have the opportunity to make a real difference in people's lives. I don't have to go show it to anybody. I don't have to beg anyone to believe me that it's different. But man, that feeling, I know it. That'd be my advice. Find out who you are. Find out why you're here. Maybe you won't find out. Maybe you just ask the questions long enough to realize why you are the person you are today. Because that's all really you need to do. Why is it that you're here? Who is it that you're supposed to be? And go from there. If I had to give any material or any books or anything like that, and it was a one-size-fits-all opportunity, Brian Withers on YouTube. He's got books. He's got a book in Spanish even. That'd be where I start. If I had to give advice to the immigrant young version of myself who's 14 years old, Brian Withers on YouTube. Find out who you are and why you're here. Find out what makes you happy. Find out how to be creative. Learn how to ask questions. The closer you could be to being yourself, the greater the opportunity you have to live a life that you choose for yourself. I'll talk about this more. Season 3 is going to be an interesting one because I have all of the topics. And the more and more I talk about it, the more fluid it'll be, the more concise, the more direct it'll be. Because right now I just found myself in a bit of a flow. And it was good because you'll find out why. So until then, take care. All the best.